Say who is Doctor Who? Where is he from? What does he do? They wonder who is Doctor Who? So I ask you, who's Doctor Who?
Welcome back to the Doctor Who Collectors Podcast, the podcast that explores the world of Doctor Who collecting and merchandise and all things related to Doctor Who. Brought to you in part by Forbidden Planet and Bags Unlimited Incorporated. I am Larry Van Mersbergen, your host, and I've been collecting Doctor Who now for 41 years. And I opened the first Doctor Who store in Chicago that exclusively served Doctor Who fans in 1984. We called it Bundles from Britain. And we are mentioned in a great book called Red, White, and Who, the story of Doctor Who in America. Bundles from Britain lives on page 384. Everybody should have this book, and you can find a convenient link to buy this book on the front page of our website at drwhocollectors.com. I just want everybody to have it. We don't earn a dime from this book. This book is a hard-working project of many friends of mine who wrote this, so be sure to give it to them. We are part of the Direction Point Doctor Who Podcast Network, and you can find some other great podcasts at directionpoint.org. If you are a Doctor Who podcaster listening to this podcast, join today, and you will join the ranks of great Doctor Who podcasters such as Time Streams, Police Box in a Junkyard, the Doctor Who Target Book Club podcast, Traveling the Vortex, Doctor Who Literature, The Old Doctor Who Show, and Time Ram. For more information, go to directionpoint.org. And speaking of links, two wonderful resources that I include in every episode include timelash.com, and under that heading, the TARDIS Library. Log in to create a free account to keep track of all your media in Doctor Who. That's books, vinyl, CDs, VHS tapes, DVDs, Blu-rays, and thank you special to Dan O'Malley for putting that together. If you need to do some research on other Doctor Who items, don't forget that Howe's Transcendental Toy Box at drwhotoybox.co.uk is available for you for free use. David J. Howe is a great friend and a best resource for Doctor Who collectors. And of course, if you're looking for Doctor Who items at great prices, look no further than DoctorWhoStore.com. It's in the name. Alien Entertainment has what you need and is currently running sales on many items. And if you live in the Chicago suburbs, you can select free pickup from the store. And while you're there, browse their incredible selection of Doctor Who and other science fiction items. They're open Wednesday through Saturday in downtown Lombard, Illinois, and opening a new store in the north side of Chicago very soon. Go to alienentertainment.com for store hours and location. You can also find some more great Doctor Who items at Forbidden Planet, and you don't have to go anywhere. Just go to our website at drwhocollectors.com and select Doctor Who merchandise links. And don't forget, we have our own eBay store. We are selling off duplicate items in the collection to raise money to pay for the podcast. We have a lot of Target books, some hardcovers, and other great goodies. In addition to all our podcasts posted on our website, we have the complete guide to Doctor Who classic hardcovers. It is getting even more complete with price guides. We track sold prices of many books, and that does affect the prices of many books out there. So we list a lot of reprints that some collectors didn't even know about. Chicago Tardis 2022 is tomorrow as of this recording. So the final guest list for the year. Autograph and photographs can be purchased through Eventbrite or at the door. The schedule is completely final, and we have that ready to go. So our guests for this year's Chicago Tardis include Sylvester McCoy, the Seventh Doctor, Sophie Aldred, Ace. Of course, they just appeared in Power of the Doctor, so you might want to get there to meet them and do a photo opportunity with both of them. Fraser Hines comes with your ticket at any convention, and he's there, of course. He played Jamie in the series. Wendy Padbury, who played Zoe alongside with Fraser, is there. Daisy Ashford, she plays Liz Shaw for Big Finish and happens to be the daughter of the original Liz Shaw, Carolyn John. Lauren Cornelius, our good friend here, she's playing Bodo Chaplet for Big Finish. Don't forget Jason Haig-Ellery. He's the CEO of Big Finish, so if you've got questions about Big Finish, he's the guy to talk to. Added recently, Sophia Miles, the Madame de Pompadour. No snogging. Stephen Noonan, the first Doctor for Big Finish, and Kevin McNally. He was Professor Jericho in Flux, and he was also Hugo Lang in The Twin Dilemma. I'm gonna try this name here. Bhavnisha Parnar, Yaz's sister in the new series, and Tim Traylor, the best third Doctor I've ever heard, and he does it for Big Finish. So there you go. My speaking schedule for Chicago Tardis, I start off on Friday at noon with Introduced by Howard De Silva, Early Doctor Who Viewing Experiences. I will also, at 2 o'clock, or shortly after 2 o'clock, I will be interviewing Brian Ulga, and he's doing I Am Sonicked Up, the props of Doctor Who, so you'll see that, hear that interview on a future podcast. At 4 o'clock, I join my good friend Tony Whitt, where we talk on and off target with Doctor Who novelizations. And then on Saturday, I am going to be at 10 o'clock in the morning. I'm going to be at the Over 30 cosplay. As you know, I do cosplay the Fifth Doctor, and I'll be there with some very distinguished people, including fellow podcaster Assad Khashoggi, and we'll be there with Jen Greeley. Later on at 11 o'clock, that's the big event here, the Doctor Who Collectors Showcase. That's my big show, and that's in the secondary program room. Immediately following that at 12 noon, I'm doing a discussion walkthrough of Tomb of the Cybermen, including a special giveaway to those who are in attendance. And then later on in the day here, at 4 o'clock in the gaming room, we'll be doing War of the Daleks. I've got 2 working games, and we'll be learning how to play that classic game from 1975. And at 7 o'clock, you can check out the TARDIS 22 Masquerade, which is all the costume people, and I will be there for that. On Sunday, you can join me in the gaming room at noon to play the Doctor Who board game from Strawberry Fair. I've got 2 games. I can accommodate up to 7 players. At 1 o'clock, we will have convention stories of the 1980s. You remember me talking about John Pertwee in an elevator in full Wurzel Gummidge. Well, that's just one story that we couldn't capture. So there you go. And of course, that completes my speaking schedule. You can get the full schedule at chicagotardis.com. Keep that in your bookmarks and experience the best Doctor Who convention in the Midwest, and it's happening tomorrow. Now, what's new to the collection? I got a lot of stuff in recently, so I've got a lovely ex-library copy of Death to the Daleks in hardcover, 2 near-mint hardcover editions of Snake Dance and the Romans, a Trump card game from 1978 inside a 2010 mini Doctor Who lunchbox. I had a little disagreement with the seller because he thought the tin was from 78 and had to explain that the neon logo wasn't around yet. I have completed my quest for both Finnish hardcovers, and so I now have a copy of The Auton Invasion, goes along with my Cave Monsters. So remember, I am half Finn, so that's very exciting. I have a slightly better copy of The Talons of Weng Chiang in hardcover, so watch my eBay store for the old copy. I have another inflatable movie Dalek that was open, so he will be on full display at Chicago Tardis. A nice copy of The Abominable Snowman in hardcover. It was a great month for hardcover acquisitions. My list is getting smaller now. I found the complete collection of all Turkish Target books, all 6. That includes the Cybermen, the Auton Invasion, the Daleks, the Day of the Daleks, the Abominable Snowmen, and I can't think of the last one. So that's all 6 of those. I've got a picture of those on our Instagram page. Also, the latest Vinyl Who, which is a complete audio adaptation of the Celestial Toymaker. Good timing for that. And linking narration by Peter Purvis. I also received an Ark in Space DVD special edition, but I found out it's not as special as the original, as it does not include the bonus material that was on the original DVD. Go figure. By the way, we would love to talk with collectors. Share your story here and become a guest host of the Doctor Who Collectors Podcast. Contact me for details at drwhocollectorspodcast@gmail.com. On today's show, I continue our coverage of classic Doctor Who hardcovers with our good friend Tony Whitt, the host of the Doctor Who Target Book Club. This time it's 1980. So be sure to watch the video on Patreon. Thank you to all our patrons who patronize us on Patreon. If you'd like to see the exclusive video content that we produce, just go to our Patreon page and subscribe with a $15 or above. And I thank all of our patrons for that. It's patreon.com/Doctor Who Collectors Podcast. All of the video Zoom interviews we have are there for your viewing, including visuals of the collectibles that we show. If you choose to support us elsewhere, you can do so at Podbean. So drwhocollectors.podbean.com, click Become a Patron, and you can support us at any level you feel comfortable. It sounds like a pledge break, but that's what it is. And of course, we are still raising money to bring Doctor Who legend Peter Purves, who played Stephen Taylor for the first Doctor and did the linking narration on the latest Vinyl Who, to be on our podcast. The goal, of course, is $271, which is exactly what their agents are asking for. So we're not trying to boost that amount. We're just trying to get to that amount. So your sponsorship would reach a lot of people, since this is the highest ranking guest that I would have on the podcast. So you just go to drwhocollectors.com and click the donate button, the PayPal donate. It's safe and secure. And make sure you enter Peter Purves in the message so we can add you to the sponsor list. Our theme song, of course, is Who's Doctor Who, composed by Barry Mason and Les Reed, performed by Fraser Hines. Also on that recording is Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin. Mason and Reed wrote a lot of great songs, including Love Grows As My Rosemary Goes, and It's Not Unusual. But unfortunately, this one was never a big hit. You can meet Fraser at Chicago Tardis. You can hear this podcast, of course, anywhere you get your podcasts, including Amazon Music, YouTube, Audible, Podchaser, Podtail, Podbean, and many more, wherever you get yours. We are a Direction Point Network podcast. You can get this podcast and many others at directionpoint.org. After a quick break, we will have Collection Protection, our main story, and the most outrageous offer. Stay tuned.
Hi, I'm Rupert Booth.
I am known as Paul Ferry.
And my name is Barry Williams.
Together, we host Time Ram.
Time Ram's a cruel mistress.
It's a random number generator.
That also.
We roll a number from 1 to 13, and that's our doctor. Then 1 to 300 for the story, and then we ram them together.
Even if it doesn't make sense.
Cruel, I tell you.
Time Ram, putting the wrong doctors in the wrong stories, so you don't have to.
You're listening to
the Doctor Who Collectors Podcast.
We are going on a journey, a very long journey, through the world of the Target novelizations in publication order. Every week, we are looking at a new book, talking about Terrence Dicks, Malcolm Hulke, and all our Doctor Who novelization friends. Whatever you do, keep turning the pages. This is Jason Miller of the Doctor Who Literature Podcast, a member of the Direction Point Podcast Network, and you are listening to the Doctor Who Collectors Podcast. Keep collecting.
Are you ready to travel through time with us? Then check out Traveling the Vortex, a Doctor Who podcast. For nearly 7 years and more than 500 episodes, we've traveled from one end of the vortex to the other, making different stops with different doctors, reviewing everything from TV stories to audio plays, from books to comics, and more. Sean, Keith, and Glenn take you on a journey through 50-plus years of Doctor Who episodes and spin-off materials. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts, so be sure to check us out. And now, we're a proud member of Direction Point, a Doctor Who podcast network. You're listening to the Doctor Who Collectors Podcast. Keep collecting.
Sad, really, isn't it? People spend all that time making nice things, and other people come along and break them.
And now it's time for Collection Protection. Collection Protection is brought to you by Bags Unlimited Incorporated, bagsunlimited.com, or 1-800-767-2247. If you do call, just happen to let them know that you heard this on the Doctor Who Collectors Podcast. I want to talk about some new products that have come out in the last couple weeks. First of all, under audio, they have an audio cassette case now that can hold one tape. A lot of people were looking for replacement cases for their old cassettes, and now they have them. Under CDs, they have also now a CD sleeve to fit CD digipack and gatefold jackets. That's important for some of your big finish. They have those with a resealable flap, and they're also on sale too. So you've got 20% off on some of these. CD sleeve to fit with 3 mil, 1.5 mil, and 1.5 mil jackets. In storage products for periodicals, of course, they've come up. If you happen to be a retailer and you're looking to mail large movie magazines or tabloids or newspapers, they have the Stay Flats Plus Rigid Mailer. which you can get for them. They're brand new, and their intro sale is 20% off. So if you go to bagsunlimited.com, click on new items, you can find all of these items there. And of course, they offer everything to protect your collectibles, with the exception of a few items. You can't really protect your action figures here, but that's something to keep in mind. So always keeping you up to date with collection protection, keeping those collectibles protected at all times. Remember, to keep things nice, you got to protect them. And sometimes you got to spend a little bit of money to protect the more rare items. This has been Collection Protection.
Hi, I'm Juliet.
And I'm Nathan.
Experience Doctor Who from the very beginning through a classic fan's eyes.
And through the eyes of a new Who fan.
Reminisce and relive those classic moments with Nathan as he offers fun insight.
Or experience them for the first time with Juliet as she dwells on social issues, history, fashion, and the size of a flashlight.
We're the Time Streams podcast.
Find us on Spotify, Stitcher, or Apple Podcasts. You're listening to the Doctor Who Collectors Podcast. Keep collecting.
Up there is the scanner, those are the doors, that is a chair with a panda on it. Sheer poetry, dear boy.
And now it's time for our main story. This is a continuation of our coverage of the classic Doctor Who hardcovers that we have now covered for a few episodes, and we've covered years 1974 through 1979, covering the imprints of Universal Tandem, which included Alan Wingate, Longbow, and W.H. Allen. We start in 1980, where the W.H. Allen is used exclusively. It is not a robust year, but the books average approximately one per month. There were 12 hardcovers published, 11 of which were W.H. Allen, and one American publication. Comparing itself with the paperbacks, the Target books only had 11 new titles, one reprint, and that was that. So they barely kept pace with hardcovers, and we're going to see that as we go forward in the years, that the Targets are going to outpace the hardcovers until the hardcover reign comes to an end in 1988. So again, giving you a brief history, since you may be starting with this podcast versus going back in time. In 1975, Universal Tandem was sold by a conglomerate called UPD to another British conglomerate, Howard and Wyndham. And the company was renamed Tandem Publishing Limited before merging with the paperback version of Howard and Wyndham's general publishing house, W.H. Allen, to become Wyndham Publications Limited in 1976. During 1977 and 1978, the Wyndham identity was completely phased out, and the Tandem imprint was phased out in 1980. Surviving titles from this backlist were reprinted under W.H. Allen's principal paperback imprint, Star Books. The Target imprint survives until 1993, though its latter years were used exclusively for the Doctor Who novelizations and recently was purchased by BBC Books for new Target novelizations. The new Targets, by the way, have nothing to do with Universal Tandem. Alan Wingate was completely retired at the end of 1977, and Longbow was completely retired in 1979. The W.H. Allen imprint will be used until the run ends in 1988. Of course, anytime I mention Doctor Who novels, I am required by order of a unanimous vote of the Chicago Tardis All Access members, that includes my vote, to include our resident Doctor Who novel specialist, the host and producer of the Doctor Who Target Book Club podcast, and that is my good friend, Professor Tony Whitt. Welcome back, my friend.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for promoting me to Professor, because that's a welcome change.
Well, it kind of goes with your day job, you know, and that's I know that by listening to several, I'd say many episodes of your podcast, you definitely have that knowledge that comes with the time, you know, and it's sometimes it's just the time spent on the planet Earth longer than others that makes you an expert in certain things, you know.
In other words, I'm old. That's what you're telling me. Okay, well, got it.
And I can say that because I'm actually older than you, but that's okay. Anyway, I wanted to pay a huge compliment. It was a recent episode of your podcast caught my attention after I heard Alison Fitz-Seyfried say, "This brings a Larry level of scholarship to this podcast."
Yes.
And I was like, oh my, I said, that just made me almost cry because I thought, wow, I made an impression on somebody. And I thought that really just, I had to go back and listen again. I'm like, wow, that was so nice. That was,
yes. it's difficult to make an impression on Allison.
I know,
she
and
forgets these as soon as she reads them.
Well, and the nice thing about Allison, if I do see her at Chicago Tardis, she always greets me with a warm hug and a hello and all that, and she's just a genuinely nice person. I know she's rough on the reviews, but that was just a nice compliment that came out, and I really just got. I thought, oh, this is really nice. It's nice to be invoked that way.
Awesome.
And coming into 1980 here, the publication of 12 books is basically, it's one more than the previous year. So that's 11 new books and one American hardcover, and no reprints at all. In fact, we won't see another reprint until 1985. So you'll all have to hang on until we catch up to that point, folks. So it'll be a while. These particular hardcovers are extremely sought after today, and you might have to win the Powerball to afford them all. And I reference that because a few weeks ago, somebody in California won the $1.6 billion prize. Hasn't claimed it yet. So, oh well, somebody's sleeping on that one. And that's okay. These books can be found in a number of ways. The first way, of course, is an ex-library condition, which is either pulled, withdrawn, or stolen from a library. All three have happened. Or a non-library edition, which is either a retail store version or a publisher-issued version. There are many of those floating around the internet these days. And a seller on eBay is popping up with all these new copies of Wingate books, and I'm thinking, I wonder if those were publisher review copies. They wouldn't necessarily be marked in any way. Sometimes they put preview on the book, but these are just new copies, or somebody had them in their closet for all these years. You never know. This is going to be an interesting one because many of these titles were the first ones to be distributed in the United States in 1985. So that actually plays a role in how they're valued. So I'll bring, first of all, any good memories of 1980, Tony?
Oh, not really, because that was an election year and Reagan got elected. So I remember staying up, being allowed to stay up late for the election returns, and being woken up around 3 a.m. and my mom telling me that Reagan had won. So went to bed very grumpy. Oh,
and won by a landslide. It was like Carter barely carried Georgia.
Yeah.
And
it's ridiculous.
I remember that well. Some Doctor Who memories from 1980 before I share my own memories here. Of course, in March of 1980, Elizabeth Sladen and Ian Marter attended the Who Won convention in Los Angeles. By the middle of the year, 97 stations in the United States had purchased the series. Of course, one of the 97 stations named is KVVU TV in Las Vegas, but no one has been able to find any listings for Doctor Who on that channel. So maybe they bought it or agreed to buy it, but never showed it. We don't know. In August of 1980, NBC, the network NBC, contacts the BBC to inquire about purchasing Doctor Who. No deal happens. So that would have been interesting. Coming up after Seinfeld, Tom Baker takes on the, that would be, just a whole different thing. And of course, there'd be commercials at bad places because British TV wasn't made for that. Right. But that was interesting there. In November of 1980, U.S. Marvel Comics commences publication of what turns out to be a 4-issue comic series, Marvel Premiere, featuring Doctor Who, and that's issues 57 through 60 of that series, with material published in Doctor Who magazine in full color, as opposed to black and white from the weeklies. Of course, for U.S. censors, the story City of the Damned was retitled City of the Cursed. Damned was rejected by the Comic Code Authority.
Oh, of course.
That I do remember there was a parody comic that came out and it said it was approved by the Common Cold Authority. That's how kind of how they treated that. But the last issue published would be June of 1981 of that series. According to, let's see, a few of my own memories of 1980. Of course, it wouldn't be until a year later that I actually went and purchased a Doctor Who item. I started my collecting in 1981. But in 1980, I do remember watching the Tom Baker episodes religiously on TV. I'm trying to think, 1980, I would have been in grade school at that point, and just enjoying
life as a kid, basically. And you and I are close to the same generation, so we would have both been in grade school at that time. And of course, Doctor Who was a big part of my life. Even I've been watching it for 5 years at that point, which is still quite, 47 years later, I'm still watching the program. Incredible stuff. Of course, as Tony mentioned, 1980 was the year that Ronald Reagan probably won one of the biggest landslides in U.S. history of being elected the president of the United States. He would serve 2 terms and would be invoked as the savior of the Republican Party.
Which it really needs now.
But it definitely needs that now. And since we are not a political podcast, we're going to steer clear of that entire thing, because that's going to get me hit on Twitter pretty hard.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
And well, of course, I have yet to pay my $8.99 for my Blue Star. But
dear. Yeah.
And I'm not going to. That's okay.
No.
In 1980, of course, all the Doctor Who hardcovers will be W.H. Allen on the imprint. This year, they will be issued with removable dust jackets until June. After June, they will be printed with laminated covers. And my guess for that, when we get to that point in the year, I'm going to probably speculate that it was, we can't afford to do this anymore. And I'm guessing that this is not the first time they've heard that at W.H. Allen, because hardcover sales were so lackluster that hundreds of these copies end up in my possession in 1985. And it's just really something else. Anyway, we start in January of 1980 with the book Doctor Who and the Underworld. And there it is. I'm going to leave these in the bags, because when I take them out of the bag, I always get nervous, especially with this one. This happens to be a mint condition copy.
Oh, wow.
It is. The binding is still tight, and there is no marks on it. It is just, it's one of the books that I had from my Bundles from Britain collection. I don't have them all, but the ones that we were able to take from, because sometimes we had like 5 copies of one, and we were like, we better not take those. We got to sell them. So this was one that I had there. Anyway, it's by Terrence Dix with a cover art by Bill Donahue. It's a beautiful cover. 3,500 copies were printed, and the book had a price of £3.75, which actually in today's value, because the pound is doing so good, would be $5.67, which isn't too bad, because in previous years with inflation, it was $20. So the book is very hard to find in any condition. You could find, I don't even know what the value would be on a mint condition copy, but I've seen them for $300 or more. And the binding is just amazing on this. This does have a removable dust jacket and has a picture of Terrence Dix on the inside front cover. I don't need to show you that again, because it's the same photo they've used since 1975. So the bio, of course, is in there. It is one of my favorite TV stories, because it was the very first Tom Baker story aired in Chicago.
Oh, that I did not know.
Yeah, in early or late 1979. In fact, I remember this because when I tuned in for Doctor Who, it wasn't John Pertwee, it was this guy. And I had no idea who this was, but I was intrigued anyway, and I watched it. And interesting enough, the next episode they showed was Giant Robot. And so I saw the opening sequence, and I went, I kind of understood now how this worked, that, okay, that's how the character works. But they showed him in this really oddball, just like the Pertwee era in Chicago. They started with the mutants, and then went to the Mind of Evil, and then went to Colony in Space. It was all over the place. And I think they showed him in the cans they arrived in, because it didn't come with any, like, here's the order of the stories, here's the program guide and all that. No, they didn't get that. And so, but it's an interesting thing. What did the Target Club think of the novel?
Well, that was episode 101, and we had J.G. McQuarrie of Talking Who to You, who's now doing a Star Trek podcast, in fact. And we had Jenny Ingersoll on, and Jenny gave it a 3.5, and J.G. and I both gave it a 2.25, because Jenny was quite enthralled with the story and rather liked what Terrence Dix was doing with it, and caught all the mythological references. But JG and I basically thought it could have gone further than it did. And we have said many times that You can tell that Terrence Dicks does not like adapting stories by Bob Baker and Dave Martin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah.
He really didn't like script editing them to begin with because they always had ideas that were well beyond the budget, and Underworld is one of those. So you can see him actually trying to rein it in on the page, but it's not a bad book. It's just not one of the best ones.
Okay, fair enough. It's been a long time since I've read that one, and of course, I read the paperback. I've never cracked that one open, so that could be my retirement right there. You never know. So that was January. So in February, we now go to Doctor Who and the Invasion of Time by Terrence Dicks with a cover by the great Andrew Skilleter. Yes, by the way, he does listen to this podcast, so I wanted to give a nice shout out to Andrew. Thank you for listening. And we'll be having him on the program very soon. His new book, I'll give a plug right now. His new book, Illuminart, is now hitting the shelves, including those that pre-ordered his gold edition, of which I was one. And the gold edition includes not only a leather-bound copy, but there is a blank page inside where Andrew does a custom drawing just for you.
Oh, wow.
So I asked him to do a John Pertwee, and so I can't wait to see what that looks like. But he wants to come on the podcast and talk about it, and then I get to ask him all kinds of questions about, so how'd they rope you into doing K9 and other mechanical creatures and stuff like that? You know, just things that, you know, and that led to Destiny of the Daleks, which was an interesting cover. 4,000 copies were printed, and not many of them sold. And I can tell you that because the remaining copies landed to the Bundles from Britain inventory in 1985. This book sold in the United States for $19, and we sold out all copies. $19. And this was the Gene Smith random pricing method. It has a dust jacket, so it's a little more. Laminate covers, $12. Dust jackets, $19. And we're like, okay. We still made money on them, so it's not a big deal. And I remember these going because we had these on the table, and people were like, I've never seen these before. I must have them. It was great. And as a result, though, we had a significant number of copies of this. This is by the way, an ex-library copy because I couldn't even get one. They were selling out so fast. And so this is actually it's not in bad condition. It's not very hard to find. I've seen many copies for sale. So you could pay up to $200 for a copy, which isn't too bad. There's a lot of non-library copies floating around the United States. So somebody has them somewhere. And if they do turn up, you might be paying a little bit more for those. And by the way, the cover print can be obtained from Andrew Skilleter's website at andrewskilleter.com. However, the original painting is lost. We don't know who has it. So his prints are all based on a scan of the hardcover book, which is interesting. And so basically that was how that worked. Many of his prints disappeared, either were taken from him or he sold them to make rent, like as we all do when we're young. So what was the verdict on Invasion of Time, Tony?
Allison and Dalton were on episode 102 for that one, and Allison gave it a 2.5, which is actually kind of high for her.
Pretty good for her, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and Dalton and I both gave it a 3. So Dalton said that this one was not a complete piece of garbage. So that's for Dalton, that's a very acid pronouncement. So I'd say that we probably didn't like it as much as we could have, but it was non-offensive.
Yeah, and for me, the TV story, it just brought to mind this wonderful gleaming console room, and the rest of the TARDIS is in squalor.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't afford to build all of those hallways, and so they used some warehouse or something where they had these stairs going down to, the same staircase over and over again in some cases, down to a swimming pool and a really bad looking locker room area. And I'm thinking, what, do they rate a high school or where did they film this? But it was just
better on the page.
Oh, I know. I've read the book because I thought, man, and it's much better on there. But the screen one was just, and of course, when I first watched it as a kid, I'll never forget thinking, oh, I wonder who the Vardens are. And we kept hoping it was the Daleks. That was because we're like, come on, let it be. And it's like, oh, it's these guys in silver suits.
Yep.
Then the Santarans show up and it's a party. So what a story. What a story. And of course, they did it in Chicago. They were doing them all cut together. So they did it in 2 parts. So you had to watch it over 2 weeks. That was it was Saturday morning, and so they did Invasion of Time Part 1, and the next Saturday morning was Invasion of Time Part 2. So had to come back for the second part. Okay, well, we go to March of 1980, and we have Doctor Who and the Stones of Blood by Terrance Dicks with another cover by Andrew Skilleter. Has a red spine, and basically the same Terrance Dicks photo and bio on the inside that they've been using since 1975. The 3,500 copies were printed, but not all of them sold because the remaining inventory again came into my possession in 1985. Bundles from Britain sold this book also for $19, and they all sold out. In fact, this one, Androids of Tara, Armageddon Factor, Power of Kroll, people were just scooping up the set and buying them all. And I'm trying to remember, I think we even gave them a deal. I think we knocked the price down a little because they were buying 5. And it's like, okay, 5 of them for, $19, okay, $100. All right, great. So they were flying off the table. The original painting for the cover is in the possession of Andrew Skilleter. So prints from Andrew Skilleter will be from the original, which is nice. This book should be fairly easy to find in the United States. Price is roughly $200. This is a copy from Bundles from Britain. We officially withdrew this copy because there was a flaw. One of the pages was off printed by a little bit, so I guess it's a printing error. So I got to keep the printing error, which might make it more valuable. I don't know. So there you go. I know this was actually a recent episode when you did the new version of this book, but what was the rating for the original version?
Well, at the time, we actually all liked it. Dalton and Jenny and I all 3 gave it a 3.5. But I think that's because it's the original story itself is pretty good. And even though David Fisher notoriously hated the novelization that Terrance Dicks did, to the point that he did the new version specifically because he hated it so much, we rather enjoyed it. That being said, when the David Fisher version came out, we read that one and loved it much more.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, and for me, the TV story, I'll never forget. This was one of the ones I watched Sunday night at 11 because they started showing from Rebos operation on Sunday nights. They stopped doing Saturday mornings. And for a while, they were showing early Doctor Who on Saturday mornings, but only the later stuff was being shown on Sunday nights. And I just remember going to bed and having the worst nightmare about the Ogre. Stones coming for you. And I thought it was a very terrifying episode.
Yes.
Especially when the camper, gets killed.
Disintegrates, yeah.
And I'm sure Mary Whitehouse had a field day with that one. But yeah, just one of those stories that was chilling, but I thought it was a good story. Plus you get the Tom Baker humor of putting on a barrister's wig and and giving a defense, which I thought he had, and I looked hard. I wanted to see if he was ever on an episode of Rumpole of the Bailey, but no, he was never on that show. But that was it was a fun story. And of course, I always loved the actress who played Vivian Faye. That's just a wonderful, wonderful acting, good story. For me, it was a favorite of mine growing up.
Yeah. Susan Engel, who played that part, also does the audiobook.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Yeah, I got to get the audiobook. It's kind of like when I was at an off story, but when I was somebody was looking through one of my portfolios, they noticed I had an autograph of Anna Berry. I don't know if you know who Anna Berry was. She played one of the gorillas on Day of the Daleks. She was the female soldier.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was at a completely different event. It was some kind of a thing for publishers. And I was walking around and I saw the name and I went, Anna Berry. And she goes, yes, that's me. I said, I loved you in Day of the Daleks. And she just got all tickled, gave me a big hug and said, hold on, hon, hold on. She went back and got her bag and she pulled out this photo she had of her holding the gun to John Pertwee and she signed it for me. So I have that in my, in fact, I might even have it right here. Hang on, this might be worth pulling up here for. Oh, here it is. Yes, here it is.
Oh,
and then
was she there for something entirely different? Or?
Yeah, she's an author.
Oh, okay.
She has it's a completely different thing. I mean, she acted for many years. I mean, she's well into her 80s now. But she said she did a lot of one-off TV roles. And I said I was in love with your character because Day of the Daleks is my favorite story, and I was just thrilled to death to meet her. And it was just really cool that she did that. So, like I said, I'm always on. When I'm out and about, so you never quite know what's going to happen. So someone was thinking, how did you get that? Because I don't think she's ever been to a convention. I said, no, she's never been to a convention. That's why that autograph is pretty nice. Okay, so moving forward here to April. We're back. We're still in the Key to Time series here with Doctor Who and the Androids of Tara. And this is by Terrence Dix with another great cover by Andrew Skilleter. 3,500 copies were printed, but just like the last title and some of the other ones here, they didn't all sell, and over 300 of these came to the United States, and they couldn't sell them either, so they ended up with me. Bundles from Britain had this copy. This book sold for $19 in the United States, and they all sold out. I was not able to get a copy. They sold out so fast. So this is an ex-library copy that I picked up about 10 years ago, but it's in really good shape. I mean, one thing I'm kind of recommending collectors get those book covers that library uses to protect hardbacks, because they really do protect the dust jacket. I mean, I've pulled them off and the dust jacket is in mint condition. So it's just, and especially if they do it right and don't use any adhesive, which you're just supposed to slide it on and let it be. But what an amazing book. Let's see here. So apparently on this particular book here, I've seen it come up for sale anywhere from $200 to $250. So the hardback price on this book actually went up in England to £3.95. So they had to increase the price. And again, sales were not very good. And I also know this was another recent episode of yours with the newer version.
Yes.
So what was the original version's rating on this one?
We had Eric Gulbranson on for that one, and who was also part of our network.
Yes,
and he gave it a 2.5. Dalton gave it a 2. So, of course, I went down the middle with 2.25. And to be honest, none of us are terribly impressed with the story, Androids of Tara. And Terrence Dick's version on the page kind of lays there flat. And unfortunately, so does the rewrite by David Fisher. He doesn't do a lot more with it, even though he does put in some flourishes that make it a little more palatable. But yeah, it's not one of our favorites.
I do have the new Target book. It's basically in my collection. It's in a box somewhere, but it was not my favorite TV story. I thought it was a weak story. It kind of made Romana's character the damsel in distress, which is something she didn't want to do. And I just didn't care for, when I saw the title, I remember when I watched it, Androids of Tara, I was thinking Android Invasion in my head. And kind of going with that, but it turned out to be something completely different. And in fact, the story could have been a lot quicker if they said, "Oh, found the key. Let's go back to the TARDIS and go to the next thing." Right. We could have avoided the whole Prince Grendel thing entirely. But no, they had to go on for 90 minutes, and that's a shame. But yeah,
I remember thinking that it was going to have something to do with Gone with the Wind.
Oh,
so
yeah,
that would have been interesting to have androids during
androids
Civil
and
War.
Androids wearing the curtain rod.
Yeah. Yes, the Carol Burnett show.
I'll never forget that. That's still burned in my head. But yeah, that's I think that's one of the weaker Key to Time stories for me. Oh gosh. And of course we keep going with that. By the way, this is one of the only times when they did the books in story order. And they mirrored this with the paperbacks. This was a rare thing, because in a few titles here, we're going to go backwards real far and then and go to something else. So it's strange how they did some of these. Of course, you'll notice, listeners, that the Pirate Planet is not included here, and W.H. Allen never published a copy of the Pirate Planet. In fact, a copy of that would not be published until well into the 2000s.
So it's a book that I know we all longed for back then. We wanted a Target book. We wanted a hardcover on it. It just never happened because of the Douglas Adams estate. And that was a shame on that. But we go to May of 1980 and we get Doctor Who and the Power of Kroll by Terrence Dix, another wonderful cover by Andrew Skilleter. I always liked his Tom Baker drawings.
Oh, yes.
Very good. This is an ex-library copy. It actually has a faint rip right down the cover here. It's hard to see, but it was repaired by, very expertly repaired by library tape on the back. So someone was paying attention there. Came out in May. The book sold, despite having this book, I couldn't get a copy of this either because, believe it or not, even though this was not a great story for me, nobody had seen these hardcovers before, so they flew off the shelf and they all sold. This one sold for $19 in the United States. 3,500 copies were printed for this book, but about 400 of them came to the United States, so that means only 3,100 copies sold in the UK. It's interesting, 37,000 copies of the Target book were printed. And those all sold. So only 10%, roughly 10% of what they did for paperback, they did for hardcover, which is really interesting on that. The cover, of course, by the way, Andrew Skilleter rates this as one of his top 5 favorite covers that he reported to Doctor Who magazine in August of 2019. So, and I think it's a great cover too. Covers of this print can be bought from Andrew's website. However, again, the original painting is missing and whereabouts unknown. So somebody out there is sitting on this painting somewhere. Some paperbacks, by the way, were included in early editions of the Doctor Who Target gift set back in '82, which had a picture of the program guide image on the front cover, and it had 4 random Target books. And those, I don't think I mentioned those yet, but in another episode, I'm going to cover those gift sets because that has to do with a complete overprinting. Like I said, 37,000 copies were printed at Power of Kroll. So they included those in the gift set. My guess is some of them were still hanging around. This book actually can fetch about $100 in non-library condition and a little bit less in ex-library condition. It's not a real sought-after book. So not one of my favorite screen stories either because of the effects were just horrible. But what was the rating on Power of Kroll?
We had Jenny back on for that one.
Oh, yeah.
And she, Dalton, and I all gave it a 2. We were extremely underwhelmed with the story. We were extremely underwhelmed with the book. And we were extremely underwhelmed, and we still joke about it to this day, with the scene of Romana saying, "Oh, but doctor, I just want to look out the window and see this thing," and having it come through the window and grab her. That's almost, like, that is so out of character for Romana.
It's almost an airplane movie moment, you know?
Yeah, it really is.
That was definitely, it was one, I think I fell asleep when I first saw it. You know, I was on it Sunday night at 11. I think I got bored because I remember, I think about 2 a.m, my mom woke me up and said, I fell over on the couch with the TV on and, and I got to bed. I got up for school the next day, no problem. But I'm like, oh, I don't remember much, but I watched it again and I was like, oh, that's why I fell asleep.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a 4-parter that plays like a 6-parter.
It does. Yeah. That's a good way to put it. Cause it probably could have been summed up in 2 parts if they cut out a lot of, do one of those, but they hadn't done a 2-parter since Sontaran Experiment. So no, we're not doing that. And they won't do another one until Black Orchid. So interesting stuff. Of course, we go now to June of 1980. This is an important time because we have Doctor Who and the Armageddon Factor, the final story of The Key to Time with Terrence Dix here and Bill Donahue's cover. But the last hardcover to have a removable dust jacket, the cheap bastards. This is the last book to have a removable dust jacket. And as a result, it's a very sought after book. This book was also in U.S. distribution with a cover price of $19. And this is a copy from that time period. Only 3,250 copies were printed. Now, the previous month it was 3,700, so they cut back a little bit on this one. 47,000 paperbacks were printed of this book. And that was during the entire run of the book. That was over 4 printings. Nothing noteworthy about this publication except, and there's no information why all of a sudden they stopped doing dust jackets and went to laminated boards. Could be a couple of reasons. I know from working in the publishing industry, one possibility is the printer they used is no longer doing them. I was like, oh, I'm sorry, we can't do that anymore. Or the printer was going to charge them too much money and they'd have to raise the price and nobody would buy them. That's another issue that could happen. Or they thought, we've had its fun with it and it's a pain to put them together because they come separate and you've got to fold them and do all that. And it's like, because I remember having to do that once. We had to take our turns. Even though I was in the marketing department, we had to go and fold dust jackets and things like that. Like, that's, what a pain. So I can understand that, but it's kind of a sad loss that up until this point from 1974, we've had this removable dust jacket, which made this book kind of special. Sales were not great for this copy, despite it. And of course, nobody announced that this was going to be the final. If they had, it might have sold better. And so this book is actually going for about $50 to $100 in new condition. A lot of them are floating about. Ex-library editions I've seen as low as $50. And, and I remember this story too. This was also another two-parter that they had to do on Sunday night because all the six-parters, they divided parts 1, 2, and 3, and then 4, 5, and 6. So you had to watch it over 2 weeks. And they always did it during pledge break so they could get more money.
Of course.
So what was the verdict on Armageddon Factor?
Well, the scores were weird on this one. Allison gave it a 1.5, but she called it not an especially vindictive 1.5.
Oh, wow. That sounds like Allison.
It was a very strange, it was a very strange qualification on her part. Dalton gave it a 2.5. I gave it a 3, and I actually said that I had read it twice because of scheduling things. I enjoyed it very much the first time through, and the book is always better in this case than the televised version because, Terrence Dix is taking it a lot more seriously than the original writers did, again, Bob Baker and Dave Martin. The second time through, though, all the plot holes come out.
Ah, okay.
So
beware. The story on the TV story, I just remember the whole Drax thing and and there's there's another Time Lord who's there. There's, of course, Lalla Ward and Mary Tam get to share some screen time, which is pretty nice. Of course, not knowing what was going to happen in the next season, for those of us that watched it the first time through, going, oh, we're going to see more of Lalla Ward. We had no idea. But that was about it. Coming back to the United States, also in June of 1980, the biggest kept secret in the country was that Aeonian Publishing, and I didn't ask you for a rating on this one because we'll get to this one later in W.H. Allen, but they allegedly published The Giant Robot in hardcover edition with no cover art. And so this is it.
Oh.
Doctor Who and the Giant Robot. Yeah. Came out, it says limited to 300 copies. This copy is still in the shrink wrap because I bought it new on Amazon for $19.95.
Oh.
5 or 6 years ago.
Good Lord.
And it's unknown what the price was originally, as with most previous Aeonian books. Red, White, and Who says that the person behind the company still doesn't remember anything about what this was, because they did interview him, but I guess he was old at that point. Now, he may be gone now, but it was probably one of the best kept secrets in the United States. This book was published here in New York, and it obviously didn't sell very well, but new copies were still available on Amazon up to 5 years ago when, by the way, incidentally, 5 years ago, Red, White, and Who came out.
Right.
So people are like, oh, these books are on Amazon. And so they were grabbed up pretty fast on Amazon.
Of course.
Because I have Day of the Daleks. I also have an Image of the Fendal. But they published several of these books. They did Revenge of the Cybermen, Genesis of the Daleks, Android Invasion. There's just no cover art, nothing here. There's a barcode on the back. And that's about it. So, as Terrence Dix credited, I'm pretty sure Terrence didn't get a dime from these people. David J. Howe actually said he thought these were all bogus publications because that's why he didn't pay much attention to them. But when I did a segment on him on a previous podcast, he kind of said, well, let me look into that a little bit more. So I sent him scans from the Red, White, and Who book to kind of show him what the research was. And he was kind of going to compile that into his notes to see what else he could find out. Whether or not they had a license, we don't know. We assume we assume they did, but we also can't verify if 300 copies were sold or if more copies were printed, or if somebody else picked up the book, scanned it, and reprinted their own. We don't know. So it's just an interesting piece of history. It came out in June of 1980. Impossible to put a rating on it because I have seen no copies for sale since they sold out of Amazon 5 years ago. Nobody's really offering them, but keep your eye out. And if you're looking to collect these, I would my advice there is if you're an eBay person, go to eBay and type in the box in quotes. Doctor Who and the Giant Robot, and then put another thing in quotes, Aeonian, and save that search. And they will email you when that listing pops up with any of those words in it. And you might get lucky. I mean, I got lucky today, just on a side note. I have one of those Berwick Dalek play suits from 1965, and it's missing the eye stalk, the gun, and the plunger. Well, today I found a plunger.
Oh, awesome.
And it came up I was like looking through because I get a bunch of these searches for research, and all of a sudden I'm like, Berwick, there's a Berwick one. Plunger. I want it. Buy it now. Yes. So I've got a plunger on the way. So I still need an eye stalk and a gun stick, and that would increase the value of this because I have it in the original box. And it is actually, and just, I know I brought it down to Oktoberfest and they were talking about the Berwick play suit. And they said, we've got one over here. and it was, wow, that's really it. I said, yeah. And you can see how, the helmet has these little leather straps that supposedly hold it on the kid's head. And it's like, I think it was a death trap, to be honest. But it's kind of cool because they capitalized on that Dalek, mania back in '65 and produced all this wonderful stuff. But what's nice, the box has printed on it with a little Dalek on there. It says the Berwick Dalek playsuit on the box. And I've done my best to keep that box in good shape, but I was, so those eBay searches do work. That's my point, is that the plunger finally came up and I was like, yes, I could grab that before, because as soon as it's listed, their email system is pretty good. They generate those emails pretty fast. So it's a pretty good deal. So of course we're gonna kind of take things down several. We're gonna lower the bar quite a bit for our next installment here. Also in June of 1980, going back to WHL, and I actually wrote in my notes here to add insult to injury.
Yes,
we get Junior Doctor Who in the Brain of Morbius.
Oh my!
By Terrence Dix with Harry Hance doing the cover art. And by the way, the paperback was delayed until November. And for some weird reason, the paperback gets a 1987 reprint because I have two copies of this in paperback. I have this cover, and then I have a blue cover with the neon logo from 1981. So for some reason, they tried to do it again. And I don't think it did well on either side. The U.S. distributor did not carry this. In fact, I remember asking about it because we saw an ad for them in one of the magazines, and they said they are not available. And I know that we went into some deep discussion on an episode of the Doctor Who Target Book Club podcast.
Yes, we did.
And did some heavy research into this. So I'm going to say I'm not going to go into the heavy research I did on this. I would like to ask my listeners to, if you don't have it already, and it should be right next to this one, go to the Target Book Club podcast, go back to that episode and listen to it carefully, and you'll learn all about the Junior series. Peter Edwards did the illustrations, and the book is very hard to find. In fact, I'll make a quick comment. I know previously we talked about Doctor Who and the Junior Doctor Who Giant Robot book, and I noted that my copy had the first 3 pages ripped out. Incidentally, another copy has surfaced on eBay, also with the first 3 pages ripped out.
What on earth?
What are the chances that they all had the first 3 pages ripped out and were dumped? Because you can't actually rip the cover off a hardback very easily. I know paperbacks, they tear the cover off.
Right.
But they tore out the title page, the acknowledges page, and the chapter pages. All missing. My copy has the 3 pages missing. And a guy in Leeds, England, who had just put his up, also has 3 pages missing, the same 3 pages.
That's bizarre.
That is not a coincidence. That is something that is out there. So that adds to my head scratchings on the Junior series. But it's a very the book, and I'll just say this to my listeners: this book is not very good. And I was on the panel for the Target Book Club, and so what was our collective thoughts on this one, Tony?
We did not like it.
No, we didn't.
We liked it better.
That's the royal we, by the way.
We liked it better than Giant Robot.
Yes, slightly.
And we let's see, Trey Corte was with us on that one. He gave both of them zeros, which is the lowest score anyone has ever given anything on the Doctor Who Target Book Club podcast ever.
I remember.
Yes. And then you, I, and Dalton all gave it 2s.
Yeah.
And we all of us scored it higher than Giant Robot because Giant Robot is just a butcher job.
It's
on
a
the
terrible
original
butcher job, yes.
It's a terrible butcher job, whereas Brain of Morbius has, let's see, how did I put it? It has stuff missing, but it has less stuff missing.
Right.
And it's better edited together. However, you do have the amazing disappearing Ohika at the very end of it.
Yes.
Because, of course, you can't have her burning herself to death in a children's book. She just disappears from the narrative.
Right.
And the next line, the very last line, goes to no, I'm sorry, not Ohika. Marin. Marin is the one who disappears, and Ohika is the last one who has the last line in the book, and she isn't the one who. Yeah, it's a very odd thing, but none of us liked it.
And I do still love to read the back cover where it says, due to popular demand, Terrence Dix has rewritten this book for 5 to 8 year olds. And yet it's still got a 1981 reprint. And I remember that reprint was also not available in the United States for Target orders. So I'm not sure what happened there. I do want to point out, though, that this book does not have a removable dust jacket, but neither did Giant Robot in the previous thing. So I think they did that as part of the children's book marketing. But again, and I'll say this again, I've said it before, this would have been a perfect Longbow imprint, since that's their children's imprint. They didn't use it. And you could probably pay, I know right now, I've seen this book on Abe's Books for $250, and the pages are not ripped out of these copies. I don't know why. Not why Giant Robot got that, but Giant Robot is a lot harder to find. So that was June of 1980. So now we get into some interesting stuff in July, because I had to do some serious research here because I've always wondered why this happened. But in 1980, we get an older book. We get Doctor Who and the Curse of Peladon by Brian Hales with the cover art by Bill Donahue.
Mm-hmm.
And not only is this the first hardcover, 3,000 copies, by the way, printed of this one. Not only is it the first hardcover to have a laminated cover, it is one of the only hardcovers to have different artwork from the original paperback.
Oh.
The paperback was by Chris Achilleos, and that's how it came out in 1974. And this book came out in 1980. Well, I found out why. And this is an interesting thing. The reason there's a dispute between W.H. Allen and the Writers Guild on publishing hardcover editions of previously released paperback books. Since Monster of Peladon was being worked on, that book was not affected because that book came out later than Curse of Peladon. Curse of Peladon came out in 1974. Monster comes out in 1980 in paperback form. So that book was not affected. So Chris's cover art could not be used as part of this agreement for this book. And despite the fact that the earlier copy here that I said had numerous reprints itself. I mean, the black logo was the original. There was the diamond logo later. There was a white logo on one of these. And I actually like the Chris Achilleos cover. It's a beautiful cover. He does John Pertwee really well. But this was interesting how this happens. It explains why future hardcovers, and we'll get to that in a couple of years when you see Day of the Daleks or Doctor Who and the Cybermen, which all came out in 74, have different artwork because they were not allowed to use the original artwork. And they had not, as far as I know, that dispute still hangs today, because normally, we all know this if you're buying books, normally the hardcover comes out first and then the paperback. But for some reason in Doctor Who and W.H. Allen's world, the paperback came out years before, and then they decided to do a hardcover. And I'm not sure why they didn't do a hardcover in 1974. They only did 2, and they didn't bother to do those covers. You'll also have The Crusaders, which has a different cover, and which had the paperback printed earlier. There was no price increase on this book, despite the fact that it has laminated boards. It's £3.95. This cover art, by the way, is not available anywhere. Bill Donahue does not have any kind of setup where he sells prints or anything like that. So it's quite interesting how that works. So if I'm wrong about that, by the way, if somebody else knows something different, please message me at Doctor Who Collectors Podcast at gmail.com. I'll actually, on the video part, I'll put that email down at the bottom of the screen and let me know, because that would be interesting to find out if he does have prints of this particular cover. And you'll notice too that there's no picture of John Pertwee on the cover, because at this point, 1980, John Pertwee is still very much alive, and he would have gotten paid for his image to be on the book, so they avoided using it. Let's see, you'll pay about $200 for this book in any condition. This, by the way, was part of U.S. distribution, but not many copies were available. I think we got 10 of these. So this is an ex-library copy, because I was not allowed to take one of. We had 10. I wasn't allowed to take one, and I was the boss. So, but this is an old one. So this actually goes back quite a bit for your podcast. But what was the verdict on Curse of Peladon?
Goes back to episode 60. Dalton gave it a 3. Allison gave it a 2, which is rather high for her. I gave it a 2.5 because that's what I do.
Yes.
This is the way I feel about Brian Hales. I like his prose style. I wish he wrote better stories, because I am not a fan of the monster. I'm not a fan of the Peladon stories at all.
I'm in agreement. I remember I saw the Curse of Peladon at a fan club meeting of the Emissaries of the White Guardian in 1982, because that was not part of the U.S. Pertwee plan. And I remember watching that at that location. He had a British PAL converted camera copy of that. And I remember just, loving it as a Pertwee story. But then as I watched it later, I thought, that's not a great story. However, I will say, just to plug this out there, if you're a Big Finish follower, definitely get the Peladon box set, because it's better.
Oh, yeah.
And David Troughton does reprise his role as King Peladon in the first story, so it's really quite interesting to hear. And of course, Brian Hales had nothing to do with that, so it's a whole new set of stories on Peladon, and I do recommend it. It's a very good story, and I think David Tennant is on. I'm not finished with it yet, but David Tennant is on it as well. But I do remember all 10 copies of this book sold very quickly, because people were like, wow, that's a different cover. And I never knew why until I did some research on it and found that was true. So going forward, any of the old books that got hardcover treatments later could not have the original artwork. And that's a shame, because, the Chris Achilles artwork, there's something just really, iconic about it. It's just really it's the first artwork, and it helps sell those books early on. But, and of course, we're coming into August of 1980, where we get a pretty lackluster cover for Doctor Who and, wrong book. I honestly thought when I did this script for this podcast, hey, I think I have all the hardcovers for 1980, but I don't. I am missing this next one. It's Doctor Who and the Nightmare of Eden. And it's really interesting how there are no copies available that I've had this one on the search for years, and it's never come up. But it's Terrence Dicks with a wonderful cover by Andrew Skilleter once again. This book was part of the distribution plan, sold at $15, but it all sold out. In fact, that sold out at the very first convention we did. And that was at the Elk Grove Village High School. And I remember really well that and this book was at This was not $19. This was $12. So it sold very quickly. The book, let's see, 3,250 copies were printed of the hardcover, and the Target book was actually released 1 month early in July, and 35,000 copies were printed. 4,000 were reprinted in 1988. The Doctor's image on the front cover comes from the story The Sunmakers, and Andrew Skilleter does own the original painting for it, and you can get copies of this print at andrewskilleter.com. The book sold well, according to reports, because it came out during the summer holidays in the UK. Mm-hmm. And it had a great anti-drug message. So despite this being in the United States, copies are impossible to find. So I have not been able to set a value on it because I haven't seen anybody sell one. And the last time I sold one, I was pretty young. So I think I was 16 years old when these sold out. So it was a long time ago. What was the rating on Nightmare of Eden, Tony?
Well, we had Jennifer Picker on that episode, and she is very much a fan of that story, so she gave the novelization a 4. Dalton and I both looked at her askance and gave it a 2.5 because we describe it as Doctor Who's very special episode.
Yeah, it's like an after-school special.
It really is. It seriously is.
And don't do Fraxoine.
Yes, and it's fine, except that you would think that Terrence Dix, being the grand poobah of educational stories to us all, would want to hammer that message harder than he does. But no, it's because it's a Bob Baker script. So, of course not.
There we go. Yeah. And Bob Baker, and it's also a great story. I've often thought about taking the footage of the ships crashing and doing a car insurance commercial with it. If you had Progressive, this might be your problem. A Time Lord might have to show up to help separate your ships. But I was not a big fan of this story. It was not something on my radar. This particular paperback I have happens to be a first edition from 1980. I'm not sure when I got it. Does not have the U.S. price on the back. That's how I can tell it's an original because Lyle Stewart hadn't been set up yet. But I just didn't care for it. That was just not my story at all. I'm glad. I'm glad they had an anti-drug message, but I was kind of lost in this campy story. Yes. So that is really sad. But and also in August of 1980, we get a twofer here. We get probably one of the least favorite covers of mine, Doctor Who and the Keys of Marinus, which basically just has this TARDIS in space here. Philip Hinchcliffe, who I know is not a favorite of the other podcast. The cover painting is by David McAllister. 3,250 copies were printed, and notably the first William Hartnell story to be published in quite some time. Mm-hmm. Andrew was unable to do the cover for this for 2 reasons. First of all, no color images were available of the Keys of Marinus at that time to work from, which was kind of difficult. And he said, I've got like 9 other commissions to do. So he was also working on the covers for the Target novelizations of Wurzel Gummidge.
Oh, right.
So those were doing quite well because John Pertwee had made that a very popular show with children. And the old children's stories by Barbara Eufen Todd got a new facelift with Target books, by the way. Target released 3 of those books, all illustrated by Andrew Skilleter. And I think I have one, Earthy Mangold and Wurzel Gummidge is somewhere in my collection. Beautiful cover of John Pertwee, because he draws John Pertwee very well. Mm-hmm. And he decided to do that. So David McAllister solved the problem. He said, how about we just simply show a TARDIS in flight over a horizon and call it, but there's nothing to do with the Keys of Marinus on the front cover of this book. Nothing to do with the story. The book is very hard to find, even though I think 50 copies made it to the United States. We did have this book, and it sold for $15. This is an ex-library copy that I got from my good friend Quirky Queen's Books in Leeds. Kirsten is her name. She actually just found a copy of The Space War and emailed me first to see if I wanted it. I said, well, I've already got it. And she said, okay, great. No, and she always tells me first when she gets a big bundle of books in, if they're Doctor Who related, she sets them aside, takes numerous photos of them and emails me and says, hey, are you interested in any of these? And can you help me with the price? So what a wonderful thing. She has she's on online bookstore through eBay, and I will share that link on the website with this post because you should take care of her. She's a great lady, and you should buy her books from her. This book, I expect to pay about $150 for a copy of this book. I did not pay $150 for this copy. I got this from Kirsten for about $75, which was really nice. It is also a laminate book. There are, again, no dust jackets, so we're back to that. And Philip Hinchcliffe, I know, not a favorite author of the Target Book Club. So, yeah. So I'm guessing this didn't fare well.
No, not really. This is the 5th episode of the podcast. And I believe it's Dalton's 3rd episode, and it's Sheena's 3rd as well. This is back when we had Sheena as our main person.
Yes, I remember.
And she gave it a high score, but it was an odd one. It was 3.8.
3.8.
So I don't know why she scored it that high, because Dalton gave it a 2.5, and I, weirdly enough, gave it a 2.3. I don't know what we were smoking that night, but it was something to get us through this book.
Yeah.
Because, oh my God. Philip Hinchcliffe, let me make this clear to your listeners, because I've had to do it with mine several times. Philip Hinchcliffe is a marvelous producer.
Yes.
And he is one of the alternative doctors, so he will always go down in Doctor Who history as an important figure.
Mm-hmm.
He's not a great prose stylist.
Nope.
And he manages to not only butcher this book, but also butchers Bascom and Dragora, and does the absolute worst version of Seeds of Doom that you could ever imagine, which is a criminal act to me, because I adore Seeds of Doom.
Oh,
Keys
yeah.
of Marinus, not so much. So I'm fine with that. But yeah, book, even this deserves better.
And for me, I didn't see the Keys of Marinus until the USA got the Hartnell package, and I thought it was okay.
Yeah,
I mean, it's not a great story, but of course, getting used to early Doctor Who. And by the way, if you want to follow early Doctor Who stories with a really unique perspective, I'm going to put a little plug in here for Nathan Laws and Juliet Vincent's Time Streams podcast. Mm-hmm. Very good discussions, because Juliet is a new Who fan looking at this for the first time, and Nathan, of course, is an old school person who's been through this many times. But you'll love the banter, you'll love the back and forth, you'll absolutely enjoy it. So my friend, I'm happy to plug you anywhere I can. So there we go. That's the Keys of Marinus. Now, in October of 1980, we get a book here that happens to be, I know, your first book.
Yes.
And it would be Doctor Who and the Horns of Nimon by Terrence Dix, with a cover by Steve Kite. 3,250 copies were printed, and I believe it's one of the shortest books.
Yes.
So this book was part of the U.S. distribution plan, which this book was in that inventory, and it was sold for $15. Today, you can find this book pretty easily for about $100 to $150 in ex-library to mint condition. There are several of these floating around. I believe 100 copies were in the bundle's inventory at one time, and a lot of them sold at Tardis 22 in 1985. I do remember that book went pretty quick. Now, that was the convention Tom Baker was not at. He was at Tardis 21 in 84. And today, actually, I saw a picture posted in one of the groups that had the 4 doctors all together. It had Tom Baker, Peter Davison, Patrick Troughton, and John Pertwee. And I remember that. That was the ending of the Tardis 21 convention. And it was really cool to see Pertwee and Baker in the same place, because you don't get to see them in the same place very often.
No.
And it's not because they didn't like each other. They were actually very good friends. Tom Baker did not feel comfortable being with other actors who played the Doctor.
Right.
He's over that now, but it's a little late now that he's 90 some odd years old. So, but, and for me, let's see, going through this here, there's really not much else to say. The book, I enjoyed the TV story. Actually, I thought it was okay. The Nimon costumes were a bit cheesy, but what did the club think of this? And I know this was your first one, so.
It was. We had Jason Miller on for that one.
Yes. I was just on his last episode, and it was a really nice conversation, and we had a great argument about pizza.
Of course,
New York versus Chicago.
Of course.
So that came up in the conversation. But he did a really nice breakdown of Destiny of the Daleks. He does his books in publication order, and just a really interesting listen. I'll give a plug for that. It's called Doctor Who Literature. To my listeners, you'll probably hear a bumper for that one in the mix tonight. So definitely give him a listen, and definitely listen to the last episode because he gets a conversation with me one-on-one.
And he gave it a 4.25, and I can't remember why exactly. I know this is one of his favorite books, and he's got an association with the story. That's specifically why he gave it such a high score. You're right; it is my first Doctor Who novelization. But I think because of that, I gave it a 3.25. Otherwise, it's not the most stellar novelization because even Dalton only gave it a 3.
Okay, that's fair enough. I mean, it's a short book. The title, for the Scanlan Empire and all that stuff here, it's not a tremendously memorable story. I do remember watching it when it came out, and I do remember when I got the books and that's about that. Of course, I don't know what happened, but no books came out in November. So we move directly to December, and we're going to close out the year with a Brian Hales novel of The Monster of Peladon, with a cover by Steve Kite again. This book was part of the U.S. distribution plan with a price of $17, but only because we got 14 copies. But that was everything they had. So that was left. It is unknown. Let's see. Oh, no, I do know. 3,250 copies were printed, but more than 40,000 paperbacks were printed of this particular book. The Steve Kite's reference for this story, by the way, for the cover, the Agador was from the Curse of Peladon, and the Ice Warrior is from the Seeds of Death. So that's how he came up with this artwork here. And again, noting the absence of a picture of the Third Doctor. Again, that references an agreement that anytime you use the image of an actor, you have to pay them. So that's why they didn't do that. Tom Baker got a pretty good deal when his picture appeared on the books. He got part of that. He even got part of the copyright notice in some of the books. So that's really quite nice. Expect about $150 for this book in almost any condition. I have a copy of that in ex-library condition because only 14 copies were sent to me. Sales were not good on these, so that's basically how that worked. Most of the, like I said, the remainder copies, whatever was left, the 14 copies they couldn't move, ended up in the United States and ended up in our catalog. And we actually had to turn away orders, I remember, because we had sold all of them at TARDIS 22, and people were ordering them online, and we had to return their checks. I remember the days, folks, when you had to write an order out, include a check in an envelope.
Hello, Larry from the future here. I mentioned online, which I didn't mean to say. We had no online in 1985, so it was through the mail only. Now back to the program.
And mail it in. Yeah, those days are long gone. So anyway, what was the review on this one, noting that Brian Hales is not a favorite?
Well, Brian Hales is.
Oh,
that's
he is.
the thing.
Okay.
His prose style is. Unfortunately, this one is Terrence Dicks adapting Brian Hales.
Right.
So you've got another remove from that good prose, and you still have the bad story. So Dalton gave it a 3, which he admitted was a little high. Allison gave it a 1.5, and I gave it a 2.5 because, again, Peladon. Yeah, I couldn't be bothered.
And this was actually a worse story than Curse of Peladon.
Much worse.
And it was a 6-parter that was 2 parts too long. And although I did enjoy Sarah Jane Smith in this one, that was the only thing I think I enjoyed about this one was the fact that, when they landed there, it was on purpose. And the Third Doctor is going, King Peladon, are you still here? Not realizing he was 50 years too late and all that stuff. But definitely and of course, this is the last time we see the Ice Warriors for a long time. You won't see them again until Matt Smith's era. So just an interesting note on that. And of course, this book is on laminates. It's not a removable dust jacket. And from here on out, the remainder of books from W.H. Allen will be on laminate covers. The only thing that will change will be the logo. When we get into the later, I believe the 1982 range, they changed the logo over to the neon logo. And then briefly in the 1987 run, we see the Sylvester McCoy logo. Just briefly, because we end this whole thing in 1988. But that wraps up the 1980 hardcovers. If you want to own a set of these, good luck, because I don't even have a complete set. Nightmare of Eden, can't find it anywhere. And most of them are ex-library editions. So I'm confident that one day I will have a complete set. And when I do, I will announce it to the world. But I did an estimation cost here on if you were to own a set of these, and I gave Nightmare of Eden, I think, a $500 tag just to be conservative. So it's about $2,225 to own a set of these books, which is a little cheaper than previous years. Remember, Planet of the Daleks, new copy sold for $2,600 by itself. So just crazy. I have all but one, but again, when you're out there looking for these books, my best thing is to look for auctions that have buy it now prices. And what you can do there, it's a great trick, and it works almost every time. Click add to watch list, and within one day, you'll get a break on the price because they want to move it. And they usually send that offer out to everybody who's on the watch list, and the first person to grab it gets it. So just keep an eye on that. If you have to go with a bidder, make sure that you set your ceiling. A lot of times that's where you get into trouble. So if you're, I just let go. I let a copy of Doctor Who and the Mutants walk away. It was a new copy. It was actually signed by the author, not a library copy. And I set my ceiling at a certain level, and it went above that. And I said, well, good luck. It's not mine. But that's how you got to play it. It's kind of like if you do go to Vegas, make sure you plan on what you're going to do so you can get home. That kind of thing. Beware of high-priced auctions. Don't start an auction that is priced well above where you think it should be. And you can always find some titles. If you're not a big fan of eBay, you might want to try abebooks.com, which is a collection of bookstores across the world, and you might get lucky there. A lot of books are offered there. But again, some of them are a little higher priced. I would say watch the Facebook groups, especially the Target book group, and respected sellers. My recommendations are always Dale Santos and David Russell. Always great people to work with. David Russell is out of Scotland. He has better access to some of these books, and he's almost got a complete run himself, but he looks out for titles for other people. And Dale Santos out of California, he was able to locate some of these elusive USA copies that have managed to float their way out to California. So anyway, my special thanks, of course, to my wonderful guest, Tony Whitt. And this podcast is being released on Doctor Who Day on November 23rd. So a happy 59th birthday to Doctor Who. And right the day before, or 2 days before, Chicago Tardis. So please stop by. If you're going to Chicago Tardis, Tony and I will be there. I'll be there all 3 days. Tony will be there at least 2 days, possibly a third. If you see us, say hello. Hey, I listen. We all like to hear from our listeners. I know you do, Tony. It's always great to somebody comes up and says, hey, I love that episode you just did. I'm like, that's great. Or I walk around the convention, I hear, who's Doctor Who playing on somebody's phone, and it's the opening to my podcast, which is a wonderful thing. And I really do love that feeling of camaraderie. So join us at Chicago Tardis. Tickets are still available for at least general admission, and some priority memberships I know are still available. Of course, one more time here, Tony, if you could tell everybody where to find the Doctor Who Target Book Club podcast, even though he is also a Direction Point Network podcast, you can always find it at directionpoint.org. But Tony, tell them where else we can get this.
Okay, you can find us on SoundCloud. All you have to do is go to soundcloud.com, and it is / Doctor Who Target BC. And if you go to Facebook, we're at Doctor Who Target Book Club Podcast, all one word with no spaces. You can follow us on Twitter. We're at DW Target BC, or subscribe to us via the podcast provider of your choice.
It sounds good. And of course, our future episodes will continue with our classic hardcovers. It'll be a little bit later on, probably early 2023 before we get to the 1981. And just to give you a little teaser of 1981, there were 5 books that were included in U.S. distribution, including one that is now fetching $750. And it was here in 1986. We had it. I still have my copy of that particular book. But right now, DoctorWhoStore.com has a new copy, presumably from the same stock, for $750. You can follow us, of course, on Instagram at Doctor Who Collectors to see the full cover art of all the books we talked about today. You can watch this episode on our Patreon page with a $15 subscription. I know you don't see Tony's face on this podcast, but you can hear his voice just as clear as day. And of course, you can see me showing the books. If you have any photos or proof of life of books that I have mentioned that I don't know anything about, you can email those to me at drwhocollectorspodcast@gmail.com with hardcover photos in the subject line. So thanks again, Tony. Again, great to talk to you here.
Same here. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. And stay tuned now for the most outrageous offer. We'll be right back.
Hello, fellow time travelers, and welcome to the Doctor Who Target Book Club podcast, the only podcast to discuss, in story order, all the Doctor Who novelizations. My name is Tony Whitt, and every 2 weeks or so, I'm joined by a 2 to 3 person discussion panel, including our so-called expert who's been a Who fan since 1979. That would be me. We also get the views of intermediate, casual, and novice fans who either have never seen the show or who have never read these books until these podcasts, including
Dalton Hughes
and
Alison Seyfried.
You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you find good podcasts, or even ones like ours. You're listening to the Doctor Who Collectors Podcast on the Direction Point Podcast Network. Keep collecting.
All my travellings throughout the universe, I have battled against evil, against power-mad conspirators. I should have stayed here. The oldest civilization. Decadent, degenerate, and rotten to the core. Power-mad conspirators, Daleks, Sontarans, Cybermen. They're still in the nursery compared to us. 10 million years of absolute power. That's what it takes to be really corrupt.
And now it's time for the most outrageous offer. This is a Doctor Who item or Doctor Who related item that appears to be way too high to be considered a reasonable offer, and sometimes they get crazy. Today we have a good example of one. It's not a great Doctor Who book, but it is a book that came out back in the 80s, I believe 1985, published by W.H. Allen. It's the Doctor Who Cookbook by Gary Downey. Now, Gary Downey was known for actually pestering the Doctor Who stars into giving up recipes, including, I guess at one point, the story I heard was that Elizabeth Sladen basically gave him something and said, please don't bother me again, and published a recipe. And then when I interviewed her daughter, Sadie Miller, I said, have you ever had this? And she said, nope. So we don't know what happened there. But anyway, this cookbook is being offered on Abe's Books by the Books and Bygones in Reading United Kingdom, a seller since May 27, 1999. Shipping to the United States is $12.08. And the total price here is $621.87. $621.87. It says that the book is in good condition, hardcover, and not much else to say here. It says it's new, but nothing. It says it's signed by the author. So okay, that may be a little bit more, but not $600. You can get a new copy of this cookbook for $31, for as low as $31.69, up to about $60. As far as having it signed by Gary Downey, I don't think that makes it that much more. 6 times the price doesn't seem to work for that. So definitely do your research. I know I've seen a copy of this cookbook at Alien Entertainment too for cover price. So there you go. That wraps it up for the outrageous offer, the Doctor Who Cookbook by Gary Downey, and that's the way it goes. Well, that wraps it up for the Doctor Who Collectors Podcast. We will see you all at Chicago Tardis tomorrow. Thank you very much to my wonderful guest, Tony Whitt. We're talking hardcover books from 1980. We will have him back in the late winter, early spring for the 1981. In the meantime, we'll have a lot of stuff coming up here, including interviews with Andrew Skilleter and Tasha Achilleos. So stay tuned and keep collecting.
Direction point!
A Doctor Who podcast network.